So what I'd like to have you do now is we're gonna go back to the things that we were drawing. Like, so let's say, for instance, let's take on uh, let's take on the stapler, for instance, which is a kind of a cool object. And I'd like for you to start to think about it. Like, we'll go back to, but this time I want you to be a little bit more careful. So the first box that I draw is to just get me help me get an overall sense of proportion, and I coordinating my Y's, making sure that this X coordinates with this X coordinates with this X. Okay, now is the time to check my perspective. And let's see. Okay. And I want to use the bottom as the proportion of the base. And now I'm going to find the shape of the top. Okay. And the top, I want to start with a transverse section for the top. I'm going to go like this, and I want to connect over. You know what? I don't like the way that hit. I don't like that. I want to go lower than that. I want to go to here, because I don't want those lines to be directly on top of each other. Okay, so here's a transverse section. Okay. And I need the middle. Okay, so I'm going to do a sagittal section because I want the middle of this object. And there's the middle. And I'm not going to draw it on the bottom because it'd just be confusing. Okay. Now what wants to happen is the top wants to come in ever so slightly on two sides. One side, two sides. And there are ways to do that technically, but they're beyond our purpose here. I'd be wasting your time to try to show you right now how to do that. So just move it in a little bit on two sides, and you start to get the effect, right? I'm going to move the transverse line inward, and you start to get the effect of a smaller rectangle within a larger rectangle. And this will move in, right? And we want to be careful about this back line. We don't need this back line to get too dark. And over here, this will move in a little ways, and that'll move in a little ways. Okay, so you're starting to see it, and what I'm going to do is I want to project downwards. I want to take my X lines now, and I want to project downwards with them. another Z line. Oh, when I project downwards, those are Y's, right? Here's a Y. I'm going to come downwards with the Y. Here's my X. Back with the X, making sure when I come out, these two lines need to be converging. Okay. Now I'm doing okay, right? So the drawing looks reasonable-ish. And now what I want to do is I'm going to use a line that passes from here. This is going to be a coronal line. It passes up and it would go over and back down, and I'll never see the other side of it. I would love to have had a little demonstration of a line that I could see both sides of, but I'll never see the other side of it. There's the other side. I'm putting it in just to be proper, okay? So there's a coronal line, and here this is another transverse line going over, and it'll come over and back around, okay? Now this part becomes solid, and that connects in with the lower part. And now this here turned out to be useful because you see this dark spot in here, and I'm going to shade this. And this spot in here, I'm going to call that an area that no light can get to. And I'm going to mass in a little bit of black in there, okay? I'm just going to go ahead and say that section is blackened. That one little spot. Okay, now on the back of the stapler, if I go from here, and again, this I can go across the form with a line that's the coronal line, but now this wants to go from there to here, so I'm shaping. See, I've shaped a pretty little arch for the back of this stapler. We start to get a sense of the industrial design of this object. Okay. I'm cleaning it. Now I'm going to go through and kind of gently clean out a lot of the lines. And it looks like here it softens ever so slightly. And then now that we've got the object kind of in our sights, now I want to ask you to go back. And yes, we were using sagittal lines, we're using transverse lines, we're using coronal lines, we're lining up our X's and our Y's, we're working from a reference. And in the midst of all of that, we end up getting a little sketch of an object. And I could add one detail further here. And it requires another transverse line. If I could take a transverse line here and I run through to the back, and I'm thinking that would go all the way around. It would come out the other side there, right? And now I'll take this and I'm going to move it inward. Take that line and move it inward here in two directions, two places. So this one now erases. This one is going to have to move upwards. So this one will come over and up. And okay, so this gives us a great opportunity to practice the development of those lines. So this would be the sagittal line running this way. And I'd like to see you guys working with these and up and across this. Okay, this here, coronal line, you can go through and you can add coronal lines any place that you think that a cross contour will help you. And it's really, really good practice. Look at the way that one goes inward. And then we'll come back over and down and across the form. And it really helps you start to establish this thing as volume, not just as, look at, I want to do here, this line, something's wrong here. I've got a perspective error happening in the front of this. And I think that what it is this. I think this comes further out. I think that I've got a problem with my Z. And you gradually get more sensitive about these things. And I would be using coronal lines, but then I'm going to interface with a sagittal line. And that helps me get that little block there. Okay, now to take the drawing one step further, now what we do is we imagine a light direction, okay? So let's take the light and say it's coming from this direction. And so what I'll do is the plane that's not facing towards the light, I'm going to cross hatch down. And I think that it's a good discipline to pick your pencil up and let it back down so that your practice is a practice of making little lines. And this is part of that plane. And this is part of that plane. And I'm working in a single hatching pattern. Okay, and I think I'm going to cross all of this once. And so I'm going to cross it, but not at a 90-degree angle, okay? And this will really help me get my form nice. And this time I go one direction, and now I'm coming back from the other direction. And what I try to do is I try to not go outside of the lines. Okay, and I'll do that here. And that's it. So we have a little bit of a shaded object here. there's a cast shadow hitting on the very surface of this, and you could sketch it in if you wanted to. Here's a cast shadow, and it comes all the way out to about there. And it will hit the ground. Okay. And then if you're drawing really like kind of for style, a thing that you might do is you might go through and darken the contour. That's not necessarily going to help with representation, but with illustration, it's a common move. And notice how the exterior lines have a weight, and then the interior lines stay lighter, and it sort of separates, it sets the object off. Okay,